This is Football at 4.
Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary. At Bet365, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast is here, which you can find on any podcasting platform or on their YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. The latest Inside the Birds podcast is out for your enjoyment with Adam and this man right here, Geoff Mosher, who joins us for this edition of Football at 4. What's going on, Geoff Mosher? How are you, pal?
I'm all right, Mike. Not a great day, I guess, in the NFL. I mean, it was supposed to be a festive day in Kansas City. Unfortunately, their parade ends in gun violence, and it's terrible to hear. I guess 8 to 10 people were victims of gunfire, and more information to come out, and that's really sad. It was supposed to be a great day for the Chiefs, right? Steve Spagnuolo gets a well-deserved extension, and ironically, on the same day, you have the 49ers firing Steve Wilks, their defensive coordinator, who was there for a year and pretty much did a good job. If you look at their rankings, their statistical rankings, and even in the Super Bowl, I think the Chiefs only had one touchdown in 4 quarters until the overtime touchdown. So kind of a crazy day. 49ers have a lot of losses. I feel like the 49ers are about to go through what the Eagles went through last year with replacing a lot of pieces of their staff, of their front office, maybe even some of their roster there.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the Niners in that vein. And by the way, yes, the shooting at the Kansas City, some of them were children, 9 people injured. One has been confirmed dead. They have found one of the shooters, it looks like. But on a day, we opened up our show, talking about what you love about being a Philly sports fan. A lot of people were chiming in saying, how unruly they can be. And I said, look, this is unfortunately fans everywhere or people that you don't want to put everybody in because of the actions of one or two or a section or some. I mean, most of the people are rational, good people who are just very passionate. This is a very unfortunate situation as the news is coming out here. But you mentioned Steve Wilks, the coordinator, gets fired. You got Shanahan, who a lot of people are wondering if he could ever win that big game. I asked the other day, are the Niners feeling more like what happened to the Eagles, where you got to the Super Bowl and then it just kind of too much happened to them to sustain it? Or do they feel that they're in a better spot with their roster?
No, I think, when you lose the Super Bowl the way they did, a couple of years ago, they were the team on the rise. And I don't know a whole lot of people expected them to be in the Super Bowl that year. I forget who they upset. They always beat Dallas. So maybe it was Dallas to get in the first or second round. And, then they got to the NFC Championship and they won and they were in the Super Bowl against Kansas City, maybe against all odds. This time around feels different. They were kind of the preordained team. I had them picked to be in the Super Bowl. They had the roster that was ready for it. They had the talent. They had the coaching staff. Sure, they had to replace D'Amico, but that's why they went and hired a guy like Steve Wilks, who had experience and success in the league. They were ready to be in that moment, and they should have won that game. I mean, I'm sure they can question about 6 or 7 ways that they figured out a way to lose that game. And now you wonder, as they go into the offseason, will they have that same Super Bowl hangover? They've already lost a tremendous amount of, they lost their assistant GM. They're losing coaches to different teams. Kyle Shanahan is still there, much like Nick Sirianni was still there, but Kyle Shanahan's the play caller. So with that offense, you expect with the talent that they have that they should be good, but they will have losses elsewhere in personnel along with coaching staff and front office. And so it's a lot to hold together, and we'll see how Kyle Shanahan is able to handle that and how their GM, John Lynch, is able to handle all of that.
Mosher,
not going to be easy.
No, it's not. And you see every year the season ends, and then quickly things start to materialize. We saw it happen Sunday with the news about Haason Reddick. You and I talked about it Monday. And then yesterday, he kind of came out and said, I never asked for a trade. But give us kind of like, now that the news came out, the Rappaport on Sunday, and then he responded yesterday, to where you think this is now, today. I know the offseason hasn't really feel like it kicked off yet, but for the Eagles, it kind of has.
Mike, I think Haason Reddick was responding to what he thought was a public perception. But I think responsible news outlets, ours, yours, other people have made the distinction when the original report came out on Sunday that being given permission to seek a trade does not equal player ask to be traded. Being given permission to seek a trade usually is the advice of either the team dealing with the player or the player's agent as a negotiating mechanism to try to gauge the value. It doesn't mean the player wants to be traded or asked to be traded, nor does it mean that the team that employs the player wants to trade the player. The Eagles don't want to trade Haason Reddick. I'm sure of that. Haason Reddick doesn't want to go anywhere. I'm sure of that. But in business, they've got to figure out a way to make the marriage work in a way that both sides are at least content. And even if Haason Reddick's not content, doesn't mean the Eagles are going to get rid of him anyway. I mean, unless he wants to hold out the whole year, which we talked about on Monday, I doubt that that's going to be his move. So these are two separate entities asking for a trade and being given permission to seek a trade. One is usually, I want out, so please find me a place. The other one is usually just help. Let's figure out what the market is for you, so then we can have a real negotiation.
At this point, you said you don't think the Eagles want to lose Haason Reddick, and okay, I think I can agree with you on that. But do you also think they want to have to extend him? In other words, like, do they hope he finds someone who wants to take him?
No,
or
I don't think so. I don't think that they want to. I mean, listen, there's always variables, right? Maybe they hope somebody wants to give up a first-round pick for him, because then all of a sudden that changes the discussion. I don't know that that's going to happen. But I don't think the Eagles want to, for a couple of reasons. One, we talked about on Monday, right? It's not like they've got Haason Reddick waiting in the wings. And Josh Sweat had a steep drop-off last year. Nolan Smith could improve a lot and be ready to take that kind of role, but we don't know. The team can't for sure say that Nolan Smith is ready to be Haason Reddick. And then the second reason is that you'd want to keep, well, three. Second reason is he gives you a great chance to continue to compete for a Super Bowl next year. And three is if he plays out his contract, has another good year, which I'm sure the Eagles expect him to at least have a pretty good year, and he goes into free agency and signs a deal somewhere else like Javon Hargrave did last year, that helps them in the compensatory pick department. I mean, they could get a third-round pick for him. We'll see what they get this year for losing Javon Hargrave. It's probably going to be something pretty significant. So there's a lot of reasons.
Do you compare this?
There's just a lot of reasons they want to keep him.
Do you compare this at all to what happened with Slay a couple of years ago? You know, the Super Bowl, and then, hey, he asked, or you can go seek a trade. Remember, there was like that whole thing where it was like,
that was last year.
Was it last year or
after
the Super Bowl?
I know it feels like a long time ago.
I said after the Super Bowl. So after the Super Bowl, the news was Slay. And they essentially gave him like more money up front and then like a second year and then like a bunch of dummy years at the end. But it was almost like they served both sides here. Like, we don't have to give you this 3-year extension with big money. We'll just give you big money up front. Or do you think the Eagles are just like, no, we're happy with the contract as consummated here based on the fact of what else they need to do to try to fix this team?
Yeah, I think there's some similarity. There's a little bit of difference. With Slay, they let him test the market. Then they did redo his deal, but they were also signing James Bradbury, right? And so you couldn't have Bradbury, making a ton more money than Slay, when Slay, in reality, even though Bradbury had a good year last year, is their better overall corner. If you remember, many years ago, the Eagles did a contract extension with Vinny Curry. I want to say it was coming off the chip. Howie had his power restored. They had a lot to figure out. They extended Vinny Curry's contract, and they made him a pretty good offer. And then immediately they had to bump up Brandon Graham's pay to make it fair, because Brandon Graham couldn't be on the team making less than Vinny when Brandon was statistically the better player, right? So there may have been some of that last year going on. Whereas with Reddick, he is still their highest paid defensive end. So they don't have to bump him up because they're doing something differently at the same position. Right now, they're just trying to figure out, if they want to bump him up, what's the market? What do they do here?
Talk with Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast. Football at 4. All right, so the Reddick stuff, we'll keep an eye on that, obviously, and see if anybody – I'm wondering, like the Bears have a lot of cap space. Is that the team that says, man, if we get that pass rusher on defense, that kind of puts our defense over the top? And maybe that's the kind of team that the Eagles are kind of hoping, who has – they're interesting because they have that number 1 pick, and if they want to move that number 1 pick, they could get more draft capital. They could have a lot of draft capital. So the Bears are one team I find interesting in this offseason. What about the other guys in Philadelphia? You want to comment on that real fast?
Yeah, well, I just, the Bears already gave up a high draft pick and a lot of money to get and sign Montez Sweat, right? So, it's not that they don't need more pass rushers. You just wonder, do they want to then trade another asset and give out that kind of money?
Well, I feel like it's tied. I feel like it's tied most to what they want to do with the number 1 pick.
Quite possibly.
Right. Like the whole thing with the number 1 pick is like, okay, I have Fields, but the problem is you have to pay Fields. But if I trade the number 1 pick, you can essentially flip-flop with Washington, get a boatload of picks, and then flip-flop out again and get even more picks. But then you're tied to possibly Fields. But do you think if you kept Fields and added all these picks and then spent the money in free agency, that kind of pushes you to the top of the NFC, as opposed to trading Fields, taking Williams, but not getting the other picks? And now you have Williams, you better hope that he is a generational type of player, because what you have left over is probably still a mediocre team.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think whatever they do with the number 1 pick will tie into also how they attack other areas of their team.
The other guys, and I think you guys talked about this on Inside the Birds podcast, so if you guys want to go check out the podcast to get a little deeper, but the Eagles are going to have to get in that situation with extensions with good players now. They haven't had to do that recently because the draft picks they had haven't really been extension guys other than Hurts, and he was a second-round pick. So is Landon Dickerson, and then you got Devontae Smith. Where do you think their priority is this offseason with trying to fix this defense, but also keeping in mind I got 2 very good players on offense that we have to think about?
Yeah, no, we talk about this all the time. When you have really good young players, I know that there's a risk in giving out extensions after 3 years, but I think the risk is greater waiting, right, and letting them get closer to free agency and allowing the market to reset 3 or 4 times. I mean, Devontae Smith is a guy that you want extended now. You know how good he is. You know how reliable he is. There's almost no box that he doesn't check. You want to wait until after Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase sign their extension? No, you don't. You want to be able to get him signed now while you still have him under technically 2 years of control, 4th year and 5th year option. And you can then add, say, like 3 or 4 years on top of those next 2 years to give it like a 6-year structure that allows you to spread that money out over a longer term, as opposed to waiting until their contract's up and then having to do it right off the bat immediately. That doesn't help you lower cap numbers. So I would do it now while you can. And I think Devontae Smith and Landon Dickerson have shown you that they're good players who you want on the team. There's no real question marks. You can talk about Landon Dickerson's injury history, fair, but they dealt without Josh Sweat, and I think it's smart to do it now.
Yeah, I would agree that the timing on both those guys feels like it should be now. You just wonder, do they have so many other things they have to focus on this offseason that might trump them putting the priority on 2 guys that they want to keep and they like? And then there's a fine line there of not wanting to disrespect them, but you hope that those guys also understand, man, we need a lot of help on defense. They'll get to me when the time is right, or is that not generally the way they think?
No, I mean, first of all, they'll think that they'll probably figure out a way to save some money this year. I mean, we'll see if Jason Kelce retires. You're not paying a top of the line center. You're paying Cam Jurgens, who's on a rookie 2nd-year deal. Oh, that's a big difference in money. If Fletcher Cox doesn't come back, that's a big savings at defensive tackle. I mean, they're still probably going to want to add a DT who's a veteran, but not pay the guy $12 to $14 million a year. We'll see about Brandon Graham. And we'll see if James Bradbury. Obviously, they'll have to take a hit, But if they post June 1, James Bradbury, then you might be saving a little bit of money on top of that. So, and then don't forget about the Howie Roseman annual restructure. And you could start with Jalen Hurts, and you can probably go through 2 or 3 other guys who are making good money, right? And figure out a way to save some money by restructuring their deals as well. So I sense that Howie's going to be very aggressive this offseason, that they want to get back to Super Bowl contention next year. They didn't make those moves at coordinator to just sit there and grow this thing over the next 3 to 4 years. They want to be in contention, and they're going to have to be aggressive in free agency and the trade market. So money will be there for them to do that.
All right, that's going to be happening before we know it. And the news obviously continues to come out with this Reddick stuff starting it off. You mentioned guys are going to have to approach about restructuring. That'll be a big part of the offseason as well. And, of course, NFL free agency about a month from now gets underway, and we're leading you to that and the NFL draft on Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. And don't forget the Inside the Birds podcast. Adam and Geoff have a fresh episode for you. You can get that wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Geoff, thanks, buddy.
All right, Mike, take care.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 from the Inside the Birds podcast here on the Sports Bash.